All right, good morning and welcome. I just want everybody to know that I've got stuff in my nose for the surgery I had last week. So if I sound a little more nasally than normal, I apologize for that. It's going to be taken out on Friday. So I guess we'll have to put up with it for the next 2 or 3 days. All right, so welcome to day 6 for the online AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class at Reagan Technical College for fall 2023. Today, as it says, we're going to go over chapters 4 and 5 of the Muroc text. Tomorrow, we will go over chapters 6 and 7 of the Muroc text. And on Thursday, by 7 a.m., I will email you pretest number 2. And basically, I'm going to give you, as it says, about 2 hours to work on it. Then I'll go over and do it from scratch, starting at 10:20. Friday will be our typical lab day, so there'll be no taping and, just for you to hopefully catch back up. And on Monday, you will take your next test, which will be on chapters 3 to 7. Now, because I'm sure it's on everybody's mind, just so you know, there's 14 people in this class, and out of the 14 people, 4 of them did not turn in a test. All right. And I need those tests in, okay? To be fair to the people who turn them in on time, if you turn it in late, you'll get a penalty. But if you don't turn in anything, you'll get a 0. And I don't want to do that to anyone. I have graded the tests. I'm not going to put them out there until everybody's has been turned in. I've also written a key for the test, and I did a 45-minute video where I basically do the test from scratch. I'm going to provide that tomorrow for everybody. So if you have not turned in the test as of yet, if it's not turned in by tomorrow, by the time class starts, you're going to get a 0. I'm not threatening anybody. I'm just trying to be honest. I'm trying to be fair to those people who did get the test done on the day that it was, basically the day it was passed out.
What are you crying for?
Okay, somebody has got their, one of you at least has your microphone on. If you could turn it off, please, I'd appreciate it. All right. So your chapters 1 through 3 written tests, labs, and homework, which we did as a class, were all due by midnight yesterday. All right, and your chapters 4 to 7 written tests, labs, and homework will be due by midnight this Sunday. We will go over the homework, which is the Halloween Superstore for 4, for 5, for 6, and for 7. You are responsible now for doing the written tests for 4, 5, 6, and 7, and doing the shape up for 4, 5, 6, and 7, and getting that done by Sunday. And again, Friday will be a dedicated lab period. I will be online, but that said, the whole period is lab for you to hopefully catch up, especially if you're behind. So with that said, I'm going to jump into chapter 4. Now, chapter 4 is how to use CSS to format the elements of a web page. And what you're going to learn, first of all, is there's 3 different ways that we can add CSS to a page. We will go over all 3 of those. All right. Which is the best way? We'll go over all of that stuff in just a minute. Now, if somebody says, well, which is the best way? I'm going to give you my opinion, and I think it's correct, but you might come up with a book where they disagree with what I say. All right. After we get done talking about how to apply CSS and the different ways you can apply it, we'll talk about measurements. And in particular, we'll talk about how you can have basically exact measurements and then imprecise measurements. So we'll go over those. We'll go over 3 different ways that you can add colors to a file, and then we'll get into working on text. All right. After that, as it says, we'll talk about there are some more advanced CSS selectors, things like relational selectors, combination or combinational selectors rather, and attribute selectors. We'll talk about all those. The chapter ends with 2 different things. On 128, they give you another example of a page, and that page has in it both HTML and CSS. So we'll quickly look at that. And then at the end of the chapter, they talk about how to use developer tools. Now, you will not be tested directly on the use of developer tools. That said, developer tools can be one of the most important tools in your toolbox. So we're going to take a look at that at the end of this chapter. My hope, my guess is probably somewhere, take around an hour or so to go through this. If we get done early, we'll start on the exercise, the Halloween for chapter 4. If we don't, we'll do it after the break. Then we're going to go into chapter 5, which is on the CSS box model, and we'll do the same thing. Now, will we be done early today? I don't know. I guess we'll see as we go along. All right. So with that said, I'm jumping in here, and they talk about how to provide styles for a CSS web page. And really, a couple of these we've talked about already. All right, what do I mean? Well, if we look at this first example right here, this is how you can apply an CSS style sheet to a website. All right, now listen to my verbiage. That shows how you can apply an external CSS style sheet to a website. Typically, when you use an external style sheet like we have in the first example, that means that you have styles that are going to be website wide, and you want to be able to apply these styles to every page on the site. So you create an external file in order to do that. Now, again, we've looked at that a little bit. We will be looking at and adding more. All right. When we look today, we go through and we start talking about what you do and what you add to a CSS file. There'll be a lot more that we're putting in here today, 40 or 50 lines, just so you can see what's in there. All right. Now, the second way that you can do this, and we didn't really talk much about this at all, and that's in the head element, you can put in, all right, what are called style tags, and they're actually right here. Now, what's the difference between putting something in as an external file and putting it in with style tags? The biggest difference is that when you put it in as an external file, typically it will apply to multiple pages, possibly to every page on the website. However, when you embed these styles in the head section like this, typically it will only apply to that page. All right, so if you want to be able to override something special for a page, you might do this. And you'll notice that it says there that this is not recommended. And the reason for that is what you want to shoot for when you are working with this stuff is what's known as a separation of concerns. What that means is your HTML should be in .html files, your CSS should be in .css files, and your JavaScript should be in .js files. In other words, each type of file should be in its own file. You shouldn't combine information, and that's what you're doing here. You're putting CSS on directly onto an HTML page, which is not considered proper practice. Do people still do it? Of course they do. All right, I kind of liken this to, you're also supposed to, when you're driving on I-70, you're supposed to be going 60 miles an hour, and nobody does it. All right, so at least at times, you may very well want to do this, but again, as it says, it is not recommended. The third way, this is the least recommended way, and that's right here. That's when you go in and apply. I want to say this again. This is when you go in and you apply CSS directly on an HTML element. All right, and again, it's not that you can't do that, but it's considered poor practice to do that. So if you look at this example right here, where it says use the style attribute to apply styles to a single element. What are they doing? They're taking an H1 tag and they are setting the font size to 5 times what it normally is, and they're making it red. All right. So how do you get around that? Well, what they could have done is they could have taken that H1 and given it a class or given it an ID, and in that class or in that ID in a CSS file, set the font size and set the color in there. That would have been considered a lot cleaner way of doing this. All right. Now, you've heard this before. The .css stands for cascading style sheets, and it does. Now they talk in here right there about the sequence in which styles are applied. And it might be the opposite of the way you think that they're applied. All right. So what happens is just forget these 3 bullets are even there. Okay. Typically, unless you turn it off, every browser applies some default styles to a style sheet. And if you say, what are those? We're going to get into that in just a bit. But by default, every browser puts certain styles on a, on a page. It just does. Can you turn that off? Yes, we're going to learn how in just a bit. But that gets applied first. All right. Then the system looks and it says, hey, do we have any .css external files that are in here? And if we do, it applies those next. Then it goes in and it says, okay, are there any embedded styles? So in other words, is there a style tag on one or more of the pages? And in that style tag, all right, are there CSS styles? If it finds any, it overrides, if necessary, what is up here in the external style sheet to do. Then finally, it says, are there any inline styles? So even though this is considered the most minor of these 3, you do those first, then you do these, then you do these. And you have to do them like that, because if you did them the other way, you would never really get any inline styles. All right. So again, please read the chapter at a minimum. Look at the pages that are on the right. Look at the examples and read where they've got the summary like you see right here at the bottom. Again, external style sheets separates the HTML from the formatting. Embedded styles are typically used for a single page. All right. And inline styles, some books will say never use them under any circumstances. It just depends on the book that you read. All right. So how to use the basic selectors to apply CSS to HTML elements. Guess what? We've looked at this already. So if we look right here at the examples that are shown here on page 105, you'll notice that what's in here in main is we've got an H1 tag and 2 paragraph tags. And both paragraph tags have a class associated with them. The class is called blue. That's really not considered a very good name. All right, you might say, well, why? What that's doing is it's maybe turning them blue, and it might be. All right, but what people do is they set something to a color like that, and then quite often they change it later, and then they don't change the name. So now let's say that it's making it red, but it's something called blue. That's just a little bit confusing. Really, when possible, if you're going to do a class or an ID, the class or the ID should have something to do with the kind of the structure of what the tag is going to do. All right. So when we look at here, here's something new. You'll notice that asterisk. Typically, when you use the asterisk like that, it's put at the top of your CSS file. The asterisk is known as the universal selector. And what that means is when you apply it, you want this to apply to the entire website. All right, if it's in a if it's in an external file. All right. Now, can you override it? Yes, and people do. But what this is saying is, by default, all right, we want margins set. And don't worry, because we're going to talk about what these are, but 0.5 EM top and bottom, 1 EM left and right. And if you don't know what an M or an EM is, you will later this period. All right. And you'll notice it here too, the H1 does not have a class or an ID applied to it. So when we go down here, this says that all H1s should be Arial font. If for some reason this computer doesn't have an Arial font, give it a sans serif font. And if you don't know what that is, we'll talk about that later. But virtually every computer made has, at a minimum, some kind of a standard serif font and some kind of a standard or default sans serif font. All right. So again, we've got this class equal blue here. And if we go down, all it says is we want the color to be blue. Okay. And you can see these two indeed are blue. No biggie right there. Then we go down here and we've got an ID. Please remember the difference between a class and an ID. All right. A class you can use multiple times on the same page on multiple HTML elements. An ID should only be used once on a page for a single HTML element. So this paragraph has an ID of copyright. It also has a class of blue right. All right. And you can have both classes and IDs. It doesn't matter if you put the ID or IDs first and then the classes, or you do it the other way. It really and truly does not matter. You can do it in either order. All right. Plus, as you should see right there, if you've got multiple IDs or multiple classes like we have here, they're just separated by a blank space. No comma, just a blank space. And again, you can have as many classes as you need in between the double quotes or as many IDs, and you can mix and match them. Now, what can be confusing is it is possible to give an ID and a class both the same name. I would say don't ever do that because it's just going to be confusing. All right. But occasionally people do stuff they're not supposed to do. So when we look at this copyright again, blue right and copyright. All right. Well, we've got a font size that's 80%. What does that mean? That means that this font size right there is 80% of the regular font size right here. And this text align right means just that, right justified. So with what you see right here, with the CSS that you see right here on your page, all right, by applying that to the HTML that's on the page, this is what you get. So as mentioned here, you code a selector for all elements with the universal selector, and by default, it should be the first thing you put in there. All right. You code a selector for all elements of a specific type using the type selector, like we did here with the H1. All right. You code a selector for an ID with the hash character, followed by that value, like the pound copyright. And finally, you code a selector for an element for a class attribute with a period, dot blue, dot right. All right. And you may or may not have already figured this out, but this is going to get a little bit more difficult than this. All right. Just because of the fact there's a lot of other things that you can do with CSS to begin with. All right. Now, if I come in here, and you've seen this kind of thing before, but if I come in here, and I'm just going to do this. I'm going to come in and I'm going to create a folder, and I'm just going to call it test. There's nothing special about this. I'd just like you to watch. All right, but I'm going to come in here and I'm going to open this folder up with code. All right, there it is. And I'm going to create an index.html file. That's it. And I'm going to put in our exclamation point and tab. And we'll just put in here home page. And I'm going to put an H1 here that says home page. And I'm going to put in a paragraph with some garbage text. Just so you know, one way I can do that, I want to put in 50 words of garbage text. So I can type in the word lorem, Lorem, 50, and hit tab. And it just gave me 50 words of just garbage text. All right. And garbage isn't really a good word for that. A better word would be filler, because it's filler text. All right, that I'm using in there. Okay, you don't have to do this, but I'm doing it just so you can see what's all in there. There's my 50 words right there. Now, why did I do this? Well, I'm gonna bring this up in Live Server. So I'm gonna right mouse click and choose Open with Live Server. Now, you may or may not be able to tell, but there is some blank area here. There's some blank area here. And there's some blank area here. That stuff was put in by default by the browser. We didn't put that in. But I'm going to show you how we can remove that. And I'm actually going to show you two ways to remove this. One way is the way it's in a book, and the other way is not in the book, but just so you see it. All right. So going back to our book then. It says when and how to use the normalized style sheet for browser compatibility. I'm going to go to this URL right here. In fact, I'm going to click on this. And it says http://nicholas.github.io/normalized.css. And I want to click on that. And it brings up a file. All right. And I'm going to click on the button that says download. And this is what's in that file. For lack of better words, one of the big things it's doing is it's removing all that stuff that the browser put in. All right. And if you say, I don't get it, well, just watch if you would. I'm going to right mouse click and I'm going to choose the save as. And I want to save it. Well, I want to save it to my test. All right. And in that test, I'm going to create a new folder called CSS. And in that CSS folder, I'm just going to put this in as normalize.css. So this is the file right in here. So I have just added it, and to prove that to you, I'm going to go back into here. And if you look, there's CSS and there's the normalize file. Everything you see in here that's green, those are all comments. All right, you can see there's quite a bit in here. Several hundred lines, it looks like. I'm up to 350 lines. What did that do? Right now, if I went back into Live Server, not a flipping thing. But I'm going to go here into my index, and in index, now remember what this looked like. All right, remember what this looked like, which was like this. All right. So I'm going to go into my index file, and right below my title, I'm going to type in the word link and hit tab. And now I'm going to put here CSS / and there's my normalized file. All right. Now I'm going to save this. So I'm going to do a file save, and I'm going to take a look at it again. And you might say not too much has changed. All right. Well, you can, if you look over here, basically now there's virtually no extra space over here. It removed things. All right. What it's trying to do when you use a normalized file is it's trying to remove all of the standard browser defaults that it puts in. So a natural question would be, okay, I get it. Why? Why would you even want to do that? Because every browser does it a little bit differently. So if you want to make sure it's going to look the same, regardless of whether you're looking at it through Safari or Chrome or Firefox or whatever, this is one way you can do it. Now, what I'm going to show you quickly, this is not in your book. All right. There is a guy who has been working with CSS basically for his whole career. And the gentleman's name is Eric Myers. And he has his own CSS reset file. All right, you can see there it is. And this is it right here. I don't expect you to understand what most of it means. The point is, what some people do when they start putting in a reset, what some people do is they use the normalize, other people use the Eric Meyer reset. Will they look different? Yes, they are a little bit different, but they both are designed to do the same thing. And that is to basically turn off any default values that are provided by the browser. All right. All right. And I'm not going to sit and read to you. You could take a look at the stuff that's in here. How to download it, I just showed you that. How to save it to the site, I just showed you that. What it does, pretty much what I just told you. The drawbacks, there really aren't any. It says it requires a small amount of overhead. It's such a small file that it doesn't really matter that much. And it's a third-party dependency. And what that means is it's not a file you created. It's a file someone else created. All right. All right, let's talk about measurements and colors. And I'm going to show you this by bringing my file back up. And you've already seen this. So let me come in here and let me add another file that's going to be .css. So now I've got two files in here. Just so you know, this is a very, very, very important point, that if you're going to use normalize and you're going to use styles, normalize should always, always, always be first. So style should be after it. Now, what I want to show you here, we've done this before, where we've come in and said body, and I'm gonna play around with this a little bit. And we've said like color, red, and background, let's just say white. All right, that's fine. All right, and if I save this, and I bring this thing back up in live server, there it is. No surprise there. There really shouldn't be. We have said that we want color, which is our font color, to be red, and we've said background to white. Now, white is the default, so we really didn't have to do that. It would have looked the same even if we'd left this out. All right. But I want to show you quickly a couple different ways that we can specify these same values. So instead of just saying color red, which we can do, you'll notice if you look over here, there's a number here. All right. And I'm going to put that in like this. All right. And I need a pound sign at the beginning. That's why it didn't show. There. And notice it's red. What I just put in there is what's referred to as the hexadecimal representation of a color. Now, you and we work in the decimal number system, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, etc. But computers don't. Quite often they work with the hexadecimal system. And with hex, the way that you hex is like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then A, B, C, D, E, F, 1, 0. So what we would call 10, the system in hex is A. What we would call 11 is B, etc. And this is what we would call 16. But what that means is I want one set of 16 and 0 ones. Why am I telling you that? Because when you put in a color right here, all right, one way that you can do it is you can put in 6 hexadecimal values. Zeros mean a total absence. I want none of it. Its 0 is 0, none. So you'll notice I've got 6 digits there, FF00 and 00. All right. What that is referred to as, just so you're aware of it, is RGB. So the amount of red is the first 2 digits. The amount of green is the second 2 digits. And the amount of blue are the third 2 digits. When I say FF, I mean I want a total saturation of those first 2 digits. So that means give me as much red as you possibly can. Give me totally no green. Give me totally no blue. All right. So that's what that means. Another way I could have done this, just so you know, is I could have said RGB 255 0 0. And that's a little confusing, but you notice it looks the same. All right. That is not a hexadecimal number. 255 again means total saturation. 0 means total absence. All right. So I've just shown you 3 different ways to do red. This way right here. All right. # FF0000. Red. All right. You may or may not have noticed, but if I come in here and do color and I type in, for example, A, you'll notice there are 5 built-in colors that start with an A: Alice blue, antique white, etc. So I could use those colors by using the human words. Or I could use the numbers, the # and the stuff there. All right. So a natural thing would be to say, okay, I get this. I sort of understand what you're talking about. Why not just use always the English words? Because sometimes you want to take a color and you don't want it exactly to be this color right here. So rather than #FAEBD7, you want #FAEBD9, let's say, and there may not be a color for that, a built-in verbiage English word color. That's when you use the symbols here. All right. If on a test, if you're not told how to put a color in, you can do it any of the 3 ways. If on a test or an assignment, you're told to use one of the color options that we just went over, then it's expected you're going to use those. Also, when you put these in, these are case insensitive. So previously I did this, like that. All right. I could have just as well done this. It doesn't matter. All I would suggest is if you're going to do it in lowercase, always do it in lowercase. If you're going to do it in uppercase, always do it in uppercase. All right. Otherwise, people tend to find that too confusing. All right. Now, if I do this, and I put in, notice that's black. That's a total absence of any color. That's nothing. It's black. So if I do that and I save this, and I go back into here, you can see what it looks like. All right. If I do this, that's a total saturation of color. That's everything. So that's good. All right. And I didn't save, so let me save. And now it should be white. There it is. Now, are there other ways of doing color as well? And the answer is yes. I don't think it's in this chapter, but I think it's in the next one. We'll see. Is you can also use something called HSL with colors. And that stands for hue, saturation, and light. We'll just hold off on that until we get to this point. All right. Not only that, when you're adding a color and you're going to see this, you can also add a special thing onto the end of a color that's called the alpha that you want to put in there. And again, once we get to that in the book, I'll explain to you exactly what that means. Okay, now I did colors, but first they're going to talk about measurements. Totally fine. And you may look here and they're going to talk absolute and they're going to talk relative. All right. What's the difference? An absolute type of measurement, it's always going to be that size. A relative measurement will try to mold itself so it'll be the right size. So that, for example, if I used relative unit of measure with text and I'm looking at something on a phone, it's going to take the size of the text and make it smaller because it's on a phone. If I use an absolute measure, it doesn't matter if I'm looking at it on a phone or on a PC, it's going to be the same size. The recommendation is most of the time, you want to use relative units of measure whenever possible. The two absolute units of measure are pixels and points. The three relative units of measure are ems, rems, and percentages. All right, so let's look at all of these. A pixel is a pixel. As it says, a pixel is a single dot on a monitor. All right, a point is a 1/72nd of an inch, but it's always going to be that size. All right, M's and rems, that when you look right there, they look almost the same. The difference between an M and a rem, notice it's whatever you have it set to currently. But a rem is what you have it set to at the top of the program. And again, a lot of this won't make a lot of sense until you see it in action. All right. And then finally, there's a percentage here. And as it says, it's a value relative to a current value. These things will make much more sense. All right. Much more sense once you start using them. So in the example here, they just got a body with a header, with an H1, a main with a paragraph. And then they put in some CSS. All right. And you'll notice when you look in here, the font size is 100%, which means whatever the default font size is, use it. Don't make it any bigger. Don't make it any smaller. All right. And then for the margin, you may or may not be able to tell here, but there are right there, there are 2 M's of margin here. There are also 2 M's here. Look at the distance between this line here and the end, and this line here and the end. All right. Now there's padding at the bottom that uses, again, these are all measurements. The best way to work with this is what I'm going to show you in the next chapter. All right. I'm going to show you a way that you can learn about this where hopefully at least it'll make a lot of sense to you. All right. Okay. So as it says here on the bottom of the page, you use the units of measure to specify a variety of properties. Absolutes are pixels and points. Relatives are ems, rems, and percentages. Colors are what we just went over. Okay, notice it says there's 16 basic color names. All right, and the three ways are what I just showed you: color with an RGB and with hex. All right, now there are more. These are the basic colors. So what this is saying is every browser should always support these 16 colors. You notice when I typed in an A, there wasn't just aqua, there was antique white and a bunch of other ones. All right, and most browsers will support for color names. I think there's about 200 of them or something like that. Now, the accessibility guidelines, notice what it says here. Dark text on a light background is typically the easiest to read. Black type on a white background is the easiest. It's also probably the most blah looking. All right. Most graphic designers use hex values to specify an RGB because, as it says there, rather than having 16 built-in colors, you now have 16 million. And when they talk about this color palette, you may or may not have noticed this, but when I went in here, and I'll redo this. So let's just put it here, there, right here, there's the color palette. Okay, so I could choose it here and just grab that. And notice it puts that color in there now. So that is now, as soon as I save this, that is now the color of my text. There it is. That's pretty ugly, but you get the idea. All right, how to use more advanced techniques. I guess they will talk about HSL now. This right here, RGBA, the A is the word alpha. All right, it is a number, a decimal number that you put in between 0 and 1. So what the heck does that mean? All right, I'm going to show you an example in just a moment. The smaller the number, the more transparent the color it is. So it'll look more and more washed out or bleached out. The higher the number between 0 and 1, so the higher it is to 1, the more opaque or the more it'll really look like it. See if they have an example in here. There you go. So here's RGB 00255. What does that mean? 0 right there, that means no red. That 0 means no green. This means a total saturation of blue. But on a 1 to 10, only make that blue 20% as dark as it would normally be. So you can see it looks really washed out. All right. When you do this, you can also use what is called hue, saturation, and light, where you're almost working off of a color wheel to do this. So as it says there in the description, you specify the number of hue degrees for a color. I will tell you, I will go back and I promise you this. Other than you being asked to do a hue possibly or what that means on a written test, I don't believe you will ever have a homework, a lab, and definitely never a test where you have to use HLS. All right, some people like it and use it a lot. It's considered, in my humble opinion, more of an advanced type of topic. All right. Working with text, you may or may not be aware of this. All right, here are some different font families. Now, what you may or may not know is when I come back here and I'm going to bring this up again, to say, oh, okay, I want my paragraphs, and I'm going to type in here font family. And you'll notice when I do this, I'm just going to grab this one that says Gill Sans right there. What does this mean? All right. All right. Let's turn on word wrap so you can see all of it. All right. This says what I want you to do is every time there's a paragraph, I want you to use Gill Sans font if that's loaded on the person's computer. If it's not loaded on that person's computer, I want you to use Gill Sans MT. If that's not loaded on their computer, use Calibri. And if that's not loaded on the computer, use Trebuchet MS. And finally, if that's not loaded, use a sans serif, which everybody has. Please notice that when there's a blank space in the word for the font, you either must put it in double quotes or single quotes as they've done here. When there is no blank space, like in Calibri and sans serif, you don't need the single or double quotes. But that's what font family means. Now, not today, but fairly soon, we're going to go out and we're going to do this. We're going to go out to fonts.google.com. And if you look in here, there are 1,562 additional fonts that you can add. Why would you want to do that? Because if there's only about 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever it is, after a while, everyone's site kind of looks the same. But you can come in here and again, you'll notice there are thousands of them. You can grab any of these and you're going to learn how to put those in to your web pages. It's really and truly not difficult. All right. And here's some examples of what some of these look like. How to specify a font family is what I just showed you. All right. Font size is how big do you want it to be? So what does that mean? Well, 12 points, that's an exact measurement. Okay. 150 says whatever the default size is for the font, make it 1.5 times that size. So what does that mean? All right, that means that if I do this, let me go back to here. All right, and I've specified one thing in there, my font family, but I'm going to say here, font size 150%. Now, I'm not going to save yet because I want you to see what it currently looks like. There's the size right now. All right. And I'll leave that there, but I'm going to jump back into here and I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to look at it again. And it now, there's two things that have changed. The font type has changed. We set it equal again to that, whatever that font was, and we set the size of our paragraphs, the font, to be 1.5 times what it was previously. You'll notice if I come back again in here and I change this, so let's change the font family again, and I'm going to put in Arial. Okay. And you'll notice there are no blank spaces, or I'm sorry, no single quotes in here. These are all single words. Let's do this and let's make this 50%. So it'll now be Arial and it'll be 50% of what the size typically is. You'll notice I'm getting an error here because I never came in and put a semicolon at the end. So let's save this and let's look at it. And you can see how much it changed. All right. This, in my humble opinion, is how you're going to learn this. You're just going to bring up a garbage file that you create or files and just start playing with it. That is the best way always to learn. All right. As it says, the fonts are searched in the order listed. If you include a font name with spaces, it must be in quotes, single or double. If you specify a generic font last, and the browser can't find any of the other ones, it'll use the generic one. All right. The font properties, well, we'll talk about the inheritance in just a bit. All righty. How to set the properties for styling and formatting fonts. Well, there's other stuff you can do. Notice with font style, the default is normal, which means don't do anything special to it. But if I come through here, I'm going to set both of these here right now. And what do I mean? Well, I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to do this. I am going to say font style, italic, font weight, bold. All right, and I'm going to change that color because it's just very hard to see. Let's just make it for right now. We'll just make it black. Okay, let me save it. And let's look at it. All right. Now that text is both bolded and it's italicized. I put in the italicizing with font style italic. I put in the boldness with font weight bold. All right. And you can see them right here. One thing I would strongly recommend, because I've seen people do this before with their web pages, and that is I'll see people who will go in and they will put everything in bold or everything in italics. You don't want to do that. All right. What you should bold or what you should italicize is just that stuff you want to stand out. Also, a font variant in here. Maybe you've seen this where sometimes the first sentence in a paragraph is in small capital letters. All right. With the font weight, you can use colors or numbers rather, 100 through 900. I always just say font weight bold myself. And the line height is how much space there is between each line. Let's look at that one. Now, again, I'm not going to save. I want you to look at this. And you can see how much space there is between each line in the paragraph. All right. But now let's go back and let's save this. And now let's look at it again. All right. A little hard to tell, but there is more space in here. Again, this is something that you typically put in for effect. All right. And there's other things that you can do as well, just to show you, because this is stuff we're going to be running across, if not right away, very shortly. And that is, for example, I can put in here text, align, center. And if I do that, and we look at it, you can see that it's centered on the page. There is a text align left, there is a text align right, and there is a text align justify to fully justify something. So there's a bunch of different things that you can put in here. And again, some of them are shown here. The text decoration can be set to none. What does that mean? Well, you already know what this looks like right here. That is, if I come in here and I go into my paragraph, and let's put in here, nothing new right there. You've seen this kind of thing before. Let's save it. And there it is, nothing new. But let's come in here and do this. All right. So again, what they're telling you in here is using the, where is it? I'm going to use a text decoration none in here. All right, let's save this and let's look at it. And you'll notice it's no longer underlined. You still get the little hand there when you put it over it. All right, but it's no longer underlined. All right, I'm going to go for just a couple more minutes, then we're going to take a break. Shadows are kind of cool, but watch about overusing them. I mean, to me, that's pretty ugly. You may or may not agree. That, again, have your own point of view over whether or not that looks good or whether or not that looks bad. All right. As it says, if a person is visually impaired, too much shadow is going to make it almost impossible for them to read it. All right. So you put in how much horizontal you want, how much vertical you want, how much blur you want, and the shadow color. Let's use the example that they've got right here. All right. So I'm just going to grab that. And let's use a different color. Let's use blue. All right. And I'll just use our new hex code. So no red, no green, all blue. All right. Like that. And all right. So now I'm going to grab that and I'm going to go back over here to my H1 tag and do it like that. All right. So let's save this. And let's take a look at it. Now that's pretty ugly. I think you'd agree, but I can soften that because I put like, all right. And maybe I change the color on it. Maybe I make it black. Okay. Well, now the whole thing is black and it's very hard to see, but there's all sorts of different things that you can do in here. All right. To me, shadows are one of those things. Do they have their place? The answer is yes. But what I have seen over my career is people tend to overuse them when there's no reason to do so. All right. But again, it, all right. This is a good place for us to take a break. It is 9:04. Let's come back, please, at 9:15, and we're going to talk about floating. When we get done with that, we're going to jump right into the exercise for the Halloween Superstore at the end of chapter 4. I'll see you in 11 minutes. I'll be right back. All right, it is 9:15, so I'm going to start back up again. Let me tell you quickly, this next section, this next couple pages here, this is old school. What I mean is they're going to show you how you can float right now. All right, floating text around images, images around text, etc. The reason I'm saying that's old school is when we get to chapters 9 and 10 of your book, you're going to learn the newer ways of doing this, which typically is going to be much easier. So why are we showing you this? Because there are still millions of websites out there that use this. So they're going to talk about, as it says, setting margins and floating an image so text flows around it. So here's an example. Now, this may not look like anything, but what I want you to see is this, that by default, if I've got an image right here, all right, we have got no guarantee that the text is going to flow right next to it like this. It might be on the next line. It could be, in different places. But what we're telling it to do right here is to float to the left. So what that says is after we put this in, the next bit of text should get as close to it as possible. And that's what floating basically is. All right, we are putting a little bit of margin between there, and that's what this is. So they don't butt up against each other. All right. Now, notice it says the page of. So look at the difference. Here, it's floating, and there's enough room with the size of the image that both of these can float. Down here, there's enough room so that one can float, and this one just goes to the beginning of the next line by default. So what should you take away from this? Well, let's look at what they say here. To float an image, you use the float property. There's three things that this can hold. You can float left, you can float right, and I believe there's a float none as well. I mean, both wouldn't make any sense. So as it says, to float an image, you use the float margin, or the float property, I should say, and to set the margins around it, you use the margin property. Okay, when we get to chapters 5 and 6, 5 will be in just a minute, we'll talk more about margins. And in chapter 6, you'll see a little bit more about floating. All right. If you tell things to float, you'll notice this is way to the left. This is floating. It's floating left. When you float something, it'll keep floating until you turn the floating off. And that's how you can do it. You say clear, either clear left, clear right, or clear both. I don't expect that to make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But what we're going to do in our example at the end of chapter 4 is with our header image, we're going to float that to the left. So you will be able to see exactly what happens. All right, so you will see it. All right. Here are some of the other selectors that you can use to apply styles. Relational selectors, combination selectors, attribute selectors. There's even more. So let's take a look at what some of these are. All right. So this one right here is a descendant. So this says, I want this to apply font size of 90% to every LI, but only if that LI is inside of a main. This says I want the color to be green for all anchor tags, but only if the anchor tag is inside of an unordered list. All right, those are relational, that's how they relate to one another. Adjacent are just that. So these are all paragraphs that are next to or adjacent to, right after, immediately after an H2. All right, and then there's children and there's general siblings. I will tell you, all right, my background before I got into computers, I was a writer. And for years, people would say, hey, do you put the apostrophe here? Do you use an apostrophe? If it ends with an S, do you use the apostrophe, etc.? And sometimes I wasn't sure. So I would tell people, when you can, just don't put yourself into the situation where you have to use it. And that's what I tell you here, especially for adjacent child and general siblings. All right. Do they have their place? Of course they do. They allow you to even more, be more granular in the way you set up your CSS. But until you really got a good understanding of CSS, I'd say just try to avoid them. All right. Now, not everybody is going to agree with what I just said. Pseudo means false. So pseudo class and pseudo elements. Here are some of the ones that you can use. All right. Now, the first four that you see there, link, visited, active, and hover, those all deal with hyperlinks. Link is the color of a hyperlink that has not yet been visited. And know by now that that's blue by default. Visited is a hyperlink that has been visited. Again, it's purple by default. All right. Active is when you take your mouse and you put it on a link and you click your mouse button, but you haven't let it go yet. And hover is when you take your mouse and you put it over a hyperlink. So you can change those to any colors you want. In other words, if you don't want your links to be blue by default, you could make them black. All right. Then focus, as it says, focus means something is in control. It has the focus. The first child, the last child, and the only child. All right. That would say, for example, if I wanted to do something in an unordered list, but let's say that I only wanted to do it to the first list item, I could use the first child. Maybe I wanted that to be a special size or a special color or something. All right. And last is the same thing, but it goes to the end. And then there's only, which I very rarely use. First letter allows you to change the size or the typeset or the color of the first letter of an element. First line is the same thing, but with a line. And again, there's some examples right here. Accessibility guidelines, these things are important. It says apply the same formatting to the hover and focus. That way, those who don't use a mouse will have the same experience as those who can. All right. There are people who use a trackball or something else. They're just physically not able to use a mouse. Pseudo classes, as it says, they're predefined classes that apply to specific conditions. Pseudo elements allow you to choose a portion of something. All right, the cascade I've kind of talked with you about before, and that is, all right, the style rule with the highest specificity is applied. Well, what did we talk about at the beginning? We said that typically when you start to apply style rules, the first thing that gets applied, if you don't have a normalize or a reset file, are going to be the default styles from the browser. Then any external files will be done. Then any style tags will be done, or inline, or internal, and then the inline stuff. All right. IDs are more specific than classes. Classes are more specific than like an H1 or a paragraph or whatever. But the key thing here is they give you this cascade order. Now, I do want you to look at something, and that is if you look at what's on the page here and you look at what's in the mustard color, you'll see there's something called exclamation point important. And what that means is I don't care what is supposed to happen here. All right. I want you to override anything and use this. The biggest thing about the exclamation point important is don't overuse it. People do, and they've got it all over the place in their CSS, and that's a really poor practice. But as you can see, when you've got the order, they override everything. So when two or more style rules are applied to the same element, that's where the cascading takes effect. The last thing that's in here, second last thing, is they show you this. So this is the next page they're creating in here. There's still not a heck of a lot to it, but you'll notice they're doing some floating. All right, in here, they're doing some work changing the color of the, I don't know if these have been visited already or not. They have right mouse or right aligned, right text aligned here, etc. So as it says, this web page uses an external style sheet. A sans serif font has been applied to the entire document. Italics and bolding have been provided. Colors have been used. All right, it says what's wrong with the typography on this page. It says the spacing above and below the block elements should be improved. All right, maybe there's a little bit too much white space in here, etc. And they'll work on that in the next chapter. So the HTML is right here. The only thing is new is what they're showing here in mustard. They've added the link. They've added a couple classes. Okay, and they've used an emphasis tag. The CSS is in here. Hopefully you will get to the point now where you can take a look at a CSS file and start breaking it down yourselves and figure out what something means. So how do you do that? Well, what I'll tell people at times is, you've got all this code was given to you at the beginning of the semester. You have all this code. So what you could do if you wanted to, or if you were having a hard time understanding this, is bring all this code up and then literally take this whole file here, this whole CSS file, and comment out every line, then bring them back in a line at a time. That's how you learn. All right, the last thing that's in here are these developer tools. Now, and I'm going to send you an email later today, but I went online and I was looking, and this is a little bit old. It's 5 years. This is Brad Traversy. He's got a 50-minute presentation here on how to use developer tools and what the heck are developer tools. All right, well, I'm going to bring this up, which is our page that we've been using. All right, now you can go way over here, way over to the right, and there's 3 dots. I can click here. I can go to more tools and developer tools, or I can on my keypad that's up on the top of my screen where I've got my function keys, I can hit the F12 key. All right, it didn't work there, so let me try doing it this way. So I'm going to do it this way, more tools and developer tools. All right, these are the developer tools. And you might look at it and say, what the heck are you doing? This is my document here, right there. That's my document. And I could come in here and I could take a look at anything that's in this document. So I could click on here, etc. And there's different tabs that come up in here. I don't expect any of this to make sense to you, not a lick. But as we go on in here, we will work with elements, and that'll show you if I highlight something in here. Look, this is basically my HTML. And if I take my mouse and I put it on my H1, you'll see that above it, all right, you can see the whole H1 tag, and you can see orange above it. and orange below it. I believe that's padding that's been put in here. If I go to the paragraph, there's more padding, etc. All right, so there's some stuff that's in here. What's kind of cool, just so you know, is this is how it looks right now on an iPad mini. Notice if I click this, I can say, okay, how would it look on an iPhone 12? And that's how this would look on an iPhone. This is what's called an emulator or a simulator. And you can bring it up by basically clicking on this thing right here. All right. Now, it's not perfect, but if I want to quickly see, well, how would this thing look if I ran it on an iPad mini? It would look like that. All right. So we will get into this elements tag in quite a bit of detail. When we get to working with JavaScript, we'll look at console a lot. There are more things in here. There's a network tab, performance tab. We'll look at some of these as we go on. All right. But if you want to get a leg up and start looking at these, because this will allow you to really open up some of the power of this. All right. So if you want to, again, I will give you this URL. It's Brad Traversy, Google Chrome Developer Tools Crash Course. We could go over it right now, but we'd spend the rest of the period on it, and you'd probably understand about 10 to 25%. All right. And that's not you, that's anybody. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up, if I can find it in my mess here. Let's see. All right, here's our homework that we've been working on. I believe that's it right there. And so far in our homework, we did the chapter 3. If you remember, we did this the other day. Lovely. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just grab the authors because mine's in here, but I've got to find it. So I'm just going to grab the authors for right now. All right, you might remember again, that's what this looked like when we got done last time. All right, so I'm going to just grab this, copy it to the clipboard, and we're going to start from there. All righty. So when we finished last time, this is what we'd added. All right, we added a bunch of, well, we added a title, we added an image, we added some an H2 and an H3 tag, etc. So you can see the stuff that's in. All right, and let me run it just so you see it. That's what it looked like when we got done. All right, now we're going to go in and manually make changes to it. Like what? Let's take a look. This is what it looked like when we finished last time. All right, this is what it'll look like when we finish now. So we're going to work with our title. It looks like we're adding a shadow to it. We are changing down here of our links. We are using inline styling, which is not recommended, but we will, I think, to make that W bigger. So we're going to do all that. So this is right here. These things here and here are what we're going to want to add. So let's go through and start doing those right now. So I've got the chapter 3. I have saved everything. And now I'm going to get rid of this chapter 4 because it's empty. And I'm going to copy my chapter 3 to chapter 4. So if I bring this up right now as chapter 4, it looks exactly the way that it did when we got done with chapter 3, right there. So let's look at first what we want to do here. All right. Says create an external style sheet for the home page from the main.css file that's in the styles folder. The file is currently blank, so we'll add a blank file called styles.css. All right. Set the default font for the document to be a sans serif font. And we'll do that. Adjust the font sizes for all headings. In addition, format the first letter of the first heading so it's larger than the rest. In the header, float the image to the left and indent both headings. Format the links so they're in bold and orange, whether or not they've been visited. All right. If the link has the focus or a mouse hovering over it, it should be in green. Format the list to increase the space between the list items. Reduce the font size for the footer and center the footer. And link the main style sheet that you have created as well as the normalized style sheet that's in the styles folder in the home page. All right, so we want to make it look like this. So let's start. So it does say that in styles, we currently have something in here called main, and that should be empty. And you can see it is. Okay, good. I'm going to bring this up in just a moment in code. All right, so that's the first thing. And we should also have in here then, we should have our normalized file. And we've got that. Okay, so it sounds like we're set. So let's come in here. And I'm going to bring up chapter 4 inside of Visual Studio Code. There we go. So here we are. So right now, we've got our index.html file. We've got an empty inside of styles, an empty file called main.css. And we also have a normalize file. So let's start there. All right. I'm going to go to index.html. I don't know why there's a blank line there. It doesn't hurt anything, but I'm removing it anyway. I don't like a lot of blank lines. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a link tag here. I'm going to actually add 2 of them. This will be styles/normalize. I'm going to add the normalize, and then I'm going to add my own. All right. You've got to get to the point now where what I just did made sense. I have added this predefined style sheet in here and my own style sheet has nothing in it whatsoever. All right, so I'm adding a blank one to it. Now, if I do a file, let's do a view and let's do a, well, we're word wrapping already, so good. Let's just do a save all. I don't think it's going to really look any different. So we're opening it with live server. It's way big, but we'll make it smaller. There we go. Looks the same as it did when we ended before. All right. So what we're told to do is to follow the requirements that we've been given. So let's go back again and look at those and start going through these. Create an external style sheet. We already did that. File is currently blank. Set the default font to a sans serif font. All right. Well, let's say you say to yourself, I have no idea what fonts are a sans serif font. So I'm going to Google here examples of sans serif fonts. What is the best sans serif font? Open Sans is one. Okay, 23 popular for 2023. So I'm going to look there. Right here. There we go. And there's a whole bunch of them. So here, this is kind of neat. Here's the difference between serif and sans serif. If you look at a serif font, you can see that the letters have what's literally referred to as a little tail on the bottom. The A you can see has those little, both the uppercase A has the two little feet or tails, and even the lowercase, where sans serif does not have that. All right. Well, there's a lot of them. Helvetica here's one. So Helvetica. All right, then let's grab that. So let's come in here. And I'm going to go into this main.css file, which is currently empty. And I'm going to say for my body, I'm going to put in a font family. All right, they said Helvetica. Well, there's one, Arial Helvetica Sans Serif. Okay, I guess that one will probably be all right. So there we got that. So now I've got that. All right, let's just keep looking at what we're asked to do here. Adjust the font sizes for all headings. In addition, format the first letter of the first heading so that it's larger than the other ones. Okay. Well, if we want to make these bigger, what do we have in here? We've got what kind of headings? H2 and H3 and H1, H2. Okay, so let's try this. We're not given any numbers. All right, so I'm going to say, let's take one last look here. These H2s and H3s, these are inside of a header. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, hey, if I've got a header and it has an H2 in it, let's change the size. So I'm going to say font size. Let's make it 2 times what it normally is. So 200%. And let's do the same thing for an H3. We won't blow it up quite as much, but we'll put in here 175%. All right, now, when I look at this, you can see what size this is. Okay, pretty obvious, but I haven't saved yet. So let me do a file, save all, and let's look at it again. And they're now bigger. All right. I mean, I'm just eyeballing this. I don't know how much bigger it's supposed to be. We're not told that we're numbers. So you can just play with it a little bit, see what you think. If you think it should be bigger, make it bigger. Smaller, you make it smaller. All right. What else do we have? Format the first letter of the first heading. Say this again. Format the first letter of the first heading. All right. And we want to do that So that's the W in welcome, I believe. All right, so it's that H1. Okay, that's the welcome to my site. All right. Well, the first thing we might want to do is we might want to make that a bigger heading too, because the other ones are bigger now. Okay, again, we're not told we have to do that. We're not told we can't do that. So I'm going to come in here and I like to put mine in order. So H1 comes before H2 and H3. So I'm going to put that here and I'm going to make my H1, the font size, 150%. All right, so 1.5 times what it would normally be. Now, you may or may not remember, but that H1 first letter, all right, well, let's take that one and make it 250%. Again, I have not saved yet. So that's what it looks like right now. Okay, and you can see now these are almost the same size. It doesn't really look like an H1. But now that I'm going to make it 1.5 times, it should be bigger and the W should be bigger still. Let's see if indeed we did it right. All right. Looks like I can still make that bigger, so I will. But you can see the W now by using that first letter is a lot bigger than it had been. So let's take this, let's make this 250, and let's make the first letter 350. All right. Again, I'm just eyeballing this stuff. That's all I'm doing. There you go. Okay. So we've got all that done. So we've come in so far. We changed the size of these two and this, and we changed the size of the letter. All right. Again, all I'm trying to do is follow the steps as they're shown in here. In the header, float the image to the left and indent both headings. In addition, change the color of the first heading to orange, italicize it, and add a black shadow. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come into here. All right. And this is right near the top. So I'm going to put it here. And I'm going to say that image that's in my header, I want to float that image to the left. Why? Because that's what we were just asked to do, was we were asked to float it to the left. All right. So did that change anything? I don't know. All right. Well, move that stuff over so you can see what that's done. Now, when we look at the way this is supposed to look, well, that's supposed to be moved over. That's supposed to be orange, and it's supposed to have it's also supposed to have a shadow in it. So let's put that stuff in. All right. And it looks like I could make this bigger too than it is right now. It looks like it should be a little bit bigger. All right. Now that was that H2 that was right here. So I'm going to change that so that instead of it being 200%, I'm going to make it 300. All right. Now I'm going to start to add some stuff to it. Okay. The font style, I'm going to make italic. The color of it, I'm going to make orange. I'm going to indent it. And you can do this any way you want. I'm just going to put in here 25 pixels. And then I'm going to put in a text shadow. All right. That should be indent, not index. That's why it's giving me an error. There we go. And finally, I'm going to put in a text shadow. Oh, 2 pixels all the way around. And we're told to make it black. All right, so you can see what I've changed here. And let's look at it. All right, looking a little better. All right. So right now, as far as the way that it's supposed to be looking, all right, this isn't floating, so we'll have to fix this in just a minute. This looks pretty good. And I think that looks pretty good. We don't really have a lot more to go in here. All right, let's go and see if we can move this over as well. All right. So again, it's supposed to look like this. Whoops. Like this. All right, so let's make it look like that if we can. That's the H3. All right. And let's come in here and let's do the same text indent of 25 pixels that we just did to try to move it over. Let's see if that did indeed move it over. Not enough. So I'm going to have to move it over further. And there's different ways of doing this. What if I made that 125 pixels? Oh, that looks a little better. It's not perfect, but it doesn't look bad either. It's pretty much lined up with the other one. All right. So what do I have left to do then? We created the external style sheet. We set the default font. We adjusted the font sizes. We floated. Format the links so they're displayed in boldface orange. All right. So we want these to be bold-faced orange. And we want that to be like that, whether they have been visited or not visited. Okay. And otherwise, we want them to be green. So let's do that. All right. These are our anchors. So if it's an anchor that has a regular link, or if it's an anchor that's been visited, we were just told we want those to be orange. All right, so I can either use the word orange or I can use pound FFA 500. Let's use that. Pound FFA 500. All right. And otherwise, so if we hover or if we're giving them the focus, we want them to be green. All right, so color. And again, we can come in here and use red, green, blue. So pound red, green, blue. So we've got that now. Let's see if that worked. And I think they're supposed to all be bolded. So we could come in here and do this. I could come in here and say, font weight, I'm going to change this in a minute, bold, and it would work. And then I could come in here and do it again. But really, why put in that extra text when I don't have to? I could just come up to the top here and say, hey, for any anchor tag, make it font weight bold. That's considered a cleaner way of doing it. So I can get rid of this one then. And this one. And let's look and see if indeed this worked. All right, there they are. And if I put my mouse over it, they turn green. Okay, and if I click on one, they should stay orange. Okay, what's left? Format the list to increase the space between the list items. All right. Now, you may or may not remember this, but we looked at line height before. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, for my unordered list, let's go in and let's set the line height like we did before to 1.4. Now, I haven't saved it yet, but when we look at it, you can see there's not much space between these. We want to add a little, and hopefully that's what we just did. And now there's a little more space in there. All right, we're just about finished. Reduce the font size for the footer and center it. All right. So where is our footer in here? There it is. So it's in footer tags. Okay. So for the footer, we want to reduce the font size. So I'm going to say font size, let's make it, I don't know, 50%. And let's center it with a text align center. So let's save that and take a look. There it is. Maybe that's too small, but it is centered and it is smaller. All right, if I make this bigger, you can see that it's still there. All right. One thing I think we said we were going to do in our footer is we were going to change the year to this year and put our name in there. So 23, Jeff Scott. And I think I'll make that a little bigger than it was. So instead of 50%, I'm going to make it 70, whoops, 75. And there it is. So as far as I can tell, that's pretty much the way that this second one should look. Let's go back and take a quick peek here and see if I missed anything. Okay. So in fact, I can do this. There we go. Let's bring them both up here. There that is. Okay, the Halloween store for the Goblin and Us. Welcome to my site. Please come in and stay a while. Looks like that's bolded here. Looks like this whole thing is bolded, but I think it already is. So let's see, what else do we have? Those are orange, my guarantee, centered, and as well. Now, for some reason, it still has Ben Murach there. I thought I put my name in there. And there it is with the right year and my name. So what did we change in here? All right, this is, I still want you to do this one, but we added these styles. So let's look at the styles that we added. All right, we came in and we added a font family to start with. I used Arial. We could have used something else. All right, I took the image and floated it to the left. We took the H1 tag and took the default font size for that H1 tag, and we made it 2.5 times what its normal size would be. All right. Then we took the first letter, and just the first letter, we made that 3.5 times what it normally would be. All righty. Then we said, and any H2 that's inside of the header, we again changed the font size. We made it italic. We changed the color to orange. We set a 25 pixel indentation, and we set a text shadow. And in the H3 header, we set the font size to 175%, and to line up the indent, we made it 125 pixels. And there's other ways you can do that as well. All right. Next, we said we want all of our anchor tags to be bolded. That's what you see in lines 30, 31, and 32. We said that we wanted any anchor tag that either had been clicked already or had not yet been clicked to be orange. And I used, rather than the word orange, which would have been totally fine. All right, I used the actual hexadecimal value. For the hover, meaning we put our mouse over it, or when it has the focus, we made that green. And again, I use that color. There's other greens we could use as well if you don't like that green, because it's kind of an odd color green. For our unordered list, we set the line height to 1.4, meaning we wanted a little space between everything that was in there. Finally, for our footer, we said the font size should be 70 of its typical size, normal size, whatever you say. And then finally, we wanted it to be centered. All right. So if anybody has any questions, this would be the time to ask. All right. Now, when I look at it here, when I grade these, I mean, we're doing this one together, but you're also going to do something similar in here for the shape up. And I'm just going to say, hey, you had these 5 requirements, these 6 requirements, these 10 requirements. Did you do all of them? And again, if they don't tell you the size to use, it's arbitrary. You should change it some way, but how you change it is up to you. And again, finally, as I've already mentioned, this now is looking the way, at least I believe, we want it to look. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and do a file, save. I'm going to close this. I'm going to grab my chapter 4, which is now done. I'm going to copy it. And paste it. And this will now become our starter for our chapter 5, which we'll do in a little bit. All right. So it is 10:02. Let's go till 10:15. All right. And then we'll take a 10-minute break. All right. So I'm going to jump into right now chapter 5. Now, chapter 5 is entitled the CSS box model. I believe I showed you the picture before, but I'm going to bring it up again. And that is right here. This is the CSS box model as defined by W3 schools. All right. And there are a bunch of them out there that you can use. Okay, content is anything that you are keying in. Content is surrounded by padding. Padding is surrounded by border. Border is surrounded by margin. So you can change any or all of these. All right. So here's the explanation. I'm not going to read it to you. All right. Let's look at the demo they have here. Okay. Just try it yourself. So here you've got this. Now I want to try to show you quickly the difference between padding and margin. So it's got here padding 50%. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that from 50% to 10%, and then I'm going to hit run again. So that was the area that was in here. All right. I'm going to also change the width from 300 pixels to 100 pixels and run it again. Why did I do this? Because I'm going to copy everything I just put in here. All right. And I'm going to paste it right below. What does that mean? That means now I got two of these. Well, I thought I would. Let's see. Oh, that's my style. I'm sorry. Let me try that again. So this, I want to grab another one of these. And now I've got two of them. Okay. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I've got two of them. So you might say big deal. Well, it will be in a second. I'm going to take all of these, both these divs, and I'm going to put them into their own div. So here's one div. Oh, it's not letting me move over. All right, so there's my first one. Then underneath that will be my second one. So what did I do and why did I do it? Well, first of all, let me end this div and run this again. Now I've got two of them. Okay. And they've got this thing around them. I don't know why, but they do. All right. What I'm trying to show you, and not very well, but what I'm trying to show you is margin is the distance between these two things. Padding is the distance that's around this thing right here. So if I go back and I change this again, all right, and I change the padding back to 100% or 100 pixels, I should say, then notice how much more space is around here, around both of these. All right. Now I'm going to cut it back down again to 10. All right. But I'm going to change the margin now. In fact, that's the width. So let me change that. I'm going to change the padding back to 10, but I'm going to change the margin pixels and run it. And now notice the difference. It's hard to see, but it's the difference here. There's 200 pixels between these two things. What I'm trying to get across to you as we start this is padding is the area that's right around whatever content you have. Margin is the distance between two bits of content that you have. All right. And I may not have explained that great, but if you understand that, you're on your way to understanding what it is we're going to be trying to do here. All right. So you get an introduction to the box model, and more than anything else, what this chapter is going to be about is how to work with margin, how to work with padding, and how to work with borders. That more than anything else, that's literally, that's about 90-some% of this chapter. So you should be able to, at the end of this chapter, you should be able to work with margin, work with padding, work with border, and understand the difference between them. Now, with what I just showed you in here too, all right, notice there's a border here. If I take that border, instead of 15 pixels, I make it, for example, 50 pixels. And instead of solid green, I'm going to make it dotted pink. going to look probably terrible. And I run it. Now notice, okay, that's the border. Looks pretty awful. All right, but it's in there now. So there's all sorts of ways that you can change this. I'm going to change that back to 10. All right, so you can see what it looks like there. All right. Again, I'm going to go for 5 more minutes and we're taking a break. Okay. Displays a web page. It takes everything that you put in there and it puts it in a box. So imagine this was our web page. What I'm telling you is this whole page would be in a box. This whole line would be in a box. Every letter that's in here would be in its own box. The reason that that is important is when you really begin to harness the power of CSS, cascading style sheets, then you're able to go in and change anything on a page. Change its size, change its color, change its width or height, etc. And that's what they're talking about in here. As it says, by putting this stuff in a box, it makes it easy to control spacing, borders, etc. To work with boxes, again, you use the box model. All right. So you've got the content. Right after the content is the padding. The padding, as it says, is the space between the content and any border. Margin is the space between the border and whatever is outside of the box that you're using. None of these are mandatory. I like the picture I showed you better than this one. You can use margin or you can totally use no margin. You can use padding, you can totally use no padding. You can have a border, you can have no border. All right, as you guess, if I had this right here where it says this is the content area, if I had no padding, if I had no border, and if I had no margin, this would look real crunched because imagine that we took everything that's in this box here and made it this size. But you can do that. So notice that's margin top, that's margin bottom, that's margin right, that's margin left. That's padding top, that's padding bottom, that's padding right, and that's padding left. Now, to show you the key, so to speak, for using these. All right, I'm going to show you quickly something here. All right, well, there you go. Okay, so I'm going to grab this one because I kind of like it. All right. When you are working with margin and you are working with padding, look at it like a clock. 12 o'clock is the top, 3 o'clock is right, 6 o'clock is bottom, and 9 o'clock is left. You can set any or all of these. Also, just so you know, whether you talk about padding and then go into margins, or whether you go into margins and then talk about the padding, they work the same. This is either going to be margin top or padding top, margin right or padding right, margin left or padding left, margin bottom or padding bottom, margin left or padding left. All right, and that's what they're talking about in here. Now, if you want to play with some math here, as they say, this is the formula that you could use to find out how much padding you have. Is that important? No. You will know if you screw up your padding and or you screw up your margin, because your page will start looking strange. All right. So as they say right there, the CSS box model lets you work with boxes that a browser places around everything that's on a page. The margin is the space between the border and either its containing block or the element next to it, and padding is the space between the element and its border. By default, the box is as wide as it needs to be and as tall as it needs to be based on the content. You can add extra height or width to padding or to border or to both or to neither. All right. So it is 10:15. Before we look at the web page that illustrates the box model, let's take a break. Let's come back, please, at 10:25, and we'll pick it up right there. All right, it is 10:25, so I'm going to continue on. Before I do, I just want to make two announcements. One of them I said earlier today. I'm going to say it again because not all of you were here at that time. And that is there are 14 of you in this class. There are 4 students out of the 14 I still have not yet received tests from. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow to get me something if you want to get some credit for the first test. All right. Because what I'm going to do tomorrow is I've created a key that I made as a separate video, and I'm going to send that out to everyone as a private video, not to be shared with other people because I'm not sure if the other class in St. Louis has taken their test yet or not. All right. That's the first thing. The second thing is just about everyone in the class got back to me and said, yeah, I wouldn't mind being in a study group. All right. So what I'm going to do is the person who volunteered to try to set something up, I'm going to send her all of your email addresses so she can get a hold of you. Now, if you're like, wait a minute, I don't want to be in it, then just send me an email today, just say I have no interest in a study group, and it's fine. All right. Otherwise, this is a way for you guys to get together. All right, and sit and talk about things. And a lot of times what people will do is meeting with a fellow student. They're willing to ask questions that they wouldn't ask to an instructor because they feel like they're going to sound dumb or whatever. So, that's, I just want to make that available to you. All right. So we're on page 146. As it says here, the next figure presents HTML for a simple web page. Let's take a look at it. Looks like this. All right, probably not the kind of web page you'd ever create, but there are a few things in here, for you to be aware of, such as, well, you can see we've got 2 pieces of content in here. All right, and it looks like there is some padding on each of these, both some top padding, bottom padding, right padding, and left padding. There is some margin between these 2 things. All right. There is a border around both of them, and yet another border around that. All right. But again, you've got to look at it more that when you look at this, if we go back and we look at the example that we just did, and what I mean in there is, let's see, sorry, that example that we just went through a couple of minutes ago. This really shows the box model. And what I mean is, look, this W is a piece. All right, it is a piece of a sentence or a paragraph, whatever you want to say. But since it's in its own box, we were able to just grab that one letter and change its size. And that's what we're getting into now. All right. All right. So let's talk a little bit about widths and heights. All right. I will tell you, in my humble opinion, most of the charts in here like this, they're golden. In other words, there's stuff in here that you're going to end up using. All right. So the width is the width of a block element. The height is the height of a block element. Well, that should make sense. It's how wide it is, or it's how tall it is. Notice that there is a min width and a max width, and a min height and a max height. All right. If you don't want to worry about those, a min width, max width, min height, or max height, you don't set them. But if you want to make sure that whatever the element is in that content area always has a certain height, you'd give it a minimum. If you want to make sure it goes no more than beyond a certain height, you give it a maximum or width. All right. And notice what it is. You can set widths, heights, you could set maximum widths, you could set maximum heights. And when you do that, you can use absolute values. So this says the width of our page is 450 pixels. This says maybe the width of our page is 75% of the size of the page. All right. So again, you can set these to absolute values, meaning points or pixels. You can set them to relative values. All right, meaning m's or rems or percentages. If you specify a percentage, it says the width is based on the width of the block that contains it, the containing block. The word auto that's in there, we're going to be using that more and more as we go on. In fact, you'll see it a little bit later today because that's one way that you can help center content on a page. Notice the min height property can also be used to be sure that an element has a height, even if there's no content in it yet. So for instance, if I had a paragraph, but I didn't put anything in there yet, its height is going to be 0. But if I go and set the min height to, let's say, 120 pixels, it's going to take that up whether it's got content in it or not. All right. And as they say, when we get to chapter 8 in a couple weeks, all right, or next week or whenever it happens to be, you'll notice that you working with these mins and max are very important in the concept of responsive web design, which means we want our website to look nice, whether we're looking at it on a laptop, a desktop, a tablet, a phone, or something else. All right, so I already mentioned to you margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left, and I used the clock analogy for that. When you set these, there's different ways that you can set them. What do I mean? If I want to set all 4 of these, so let's say that what I literally want to do in here, I'm just going to throw something up on the screen so you see it. If I want to set all 4 of them to, let's say, 1 rem, I can say margin top, 1 rem, margin bottom, 1 rem, margin right and left, right. The order in which you set these does not matter. 1 rem and margin right. 1 rem. That's fine, not a problem. But if I want to set all 4 of them to the same value, I can replace those 4 lines with just this. And that sets everything. All right. There's shortcuts in here. If I do this, if I say, if I do that one, so you saw this is a shortcut for this. All right. Let me grab this just so you see it. And let me move this down. All right. If I just list 2 of them in here like this is a shortcut for this. So if I do this, that should say RM, not REM, not RM. So if I do this, it's a shortcut for doing this. So if I list 2 values, the first value will hold the top and the bottom. The second value will hold the right and the left. If I just set 1, it handles top, bottom, right, and left. All right. And there's more. Notice you can set 3 values. All right. When you set 3 values, the first one applies to the top. The second one applies to the left and the right. And the third one applies to the bottom. I hardly ever use that one because I always get confused as to which ones are which. And padding works the exact same way. So all 4, top, bottom, left, right, top, left, right, bottom, top, right, left, top, right, bottom, left. And again, padding works the same way. If you set the top and bottom to 0, for margin, as it says, you can use padding to set the spacing between elements. Part of the problem that people run into, especially when they're first starting with this stuff, is how do I use padding versus how do I use margin versus how do I use both? And I can tell you that there's no firm and fast rule. Quite often, you will use both. Just remember that padding, let's assume that everything you've got has a border around it. Padding is all the area between your content and its border. Margin is the area between 2 different pieces of content. That's the only way that I can think of explaining it to you. So a web page that illustrates sizing and spacing. So let's look at it. So let's first of all, let's talk about what they've changed in here. All right. In my opinion, at least, not a whole heck of a lot. All right. From what they showed before, looks like this probably is still floated. All right. And let's see. They put an ID in here with a contact us. So they've added this. All right. But hopefully what you're starting to see is, okay, it's a little more uniform. Earlier, we had a big thing of white space here and a big thing of white space here. Not so much now. All right. The idea is you want to have a little bit of what I would kind of refer to as symmetry in here. All right. As far as how everything is laid out. Now, if you are creating a website for someone and you show them this, they might look at it and say, hey, John, hey, Mary, I don't want as much space over here or over, well, then you move it. All right. So there's either padding that's been added here or margin, probably margin, but it could be padding. All right. And you just minimize it or you get rid of it altogether if that's what they want. So as far as the CSS for the page, notice the first thing they've done in the body here that's new. They have set the width of the page. They have set the width of the page. All right. And what that is saying is we want the width of the page to be 700 pixels. All right. That's the size of the page. It's not the max width or a min width. That is the width. Then we set the margin. Remember, since there are 2 values there, the 1M that's in there will set the top margin and the bottom margin to 1M. Auto means center it. So that will center the the right and the left as best it can. Then for our H1, our H2, our H3 headers, and our paragraph, we want there to be no margin and no padding to start out with. All right. Then for our unordered list, notice again, 3 values. So 0 padding top, 0 padding right and left, 1.5 M's on the bottom. it starts to get a little hinky in here as far as, wait a minute, what is this? Why the UL and why the LI? Well, remember the UL is the whole thing. The LI are the LIs are the components of the UL. All right, and then finally for each paragraph here, we want 0.25 m's of padding top and bottom, nothing left and right. And for our H2 that are in a header, we want a bottom, just a bottom margin of 0.25 m. All right, and hopefully you can read the rest and it makes a little sense. Again, I cannot say this to you too many times. As we go through this, if you say to yourself, okay, I listened to everything you said and I'm just totally screwed up. I don't know. I don't get any of it. So then what I would do is in what earlier this semester. All right, is that here? No, it is not. I would go back to where you have all the stuff that you were provided earlier this semester. In other words, this thing that was called AWD1000 students. I would go look at that. I would open that. I would go to HTML, CSS. I would go to student download, book apps. And for instance, we're in chapter 5 now. Town hall. There it is. So you can go in and make any change in here you want and immediately see the reflection of the change you made. Again, I can't say this to you too many times. You learn a heck of a lot more by just bringing something up on screen and playing with it, making some changes to see what happens than you do listening to me. All right, a version of CSS that uses a reset selector. There's a reset right there. Now, that's not a reset like we did before with normalize, but what that is saying is at the top right there, that is saying, hey, for the entire document, get rid of all margin, get rid of all padding. So that is saying that if we don't use normalize and we don't use that CSS reset that I mentioned to you before, that's saying at a minimum, we want to make sure that when we start creating this page, there's no margin on anything. There's no header on anything. I'm sorry, no padding on anything. Okay. It's a shortcut for using normalize or whatever, because all you're doing is changing those two things, those two properties. All right. Setting borders and setting backgrounds. Now, look at this. It's very important that you take a quick look at this. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things in there if I counted right. You can set everything at one time by using border, or you can set everything one thing at a time by using as many of the other 7 things in here that you need to set. All right. So in other words, when you set a border, you can set the other stuff with it. You can set a border, you can set the width, you can set the style, you can set the color. Or you can set them separately. It's totally up to you. Some people, especially when they're first learning, find it easier to set a bunch of stuff one at a time so they can set them individually and see what's happening. Other people disagree with that and like to set everything at once and be able to see the fruits of their labor, so to speak. And everybody's different as far as which is, I'm not going to say one is right and the other. There's a lot of different styles that you can set with this. All right, there's dashed. There's here, look. I'm going to do this. I'm going to say W3 schools, border types. All right. Borders, W3 schools. All right. There's the ones you can use. Dotted, dash, solid, double, groove, ridge, inset, outset, none and hidden. And if you go through these, take a look in here. There's the examples. Now they haven't done anything with color or with size, but those are the different things that you can set up. All right. All right. Adding rounded corners and shadows to borders. There's rounded. Notice here we've got 1, 2, 3. 3 of our corners are rounded. 1 corner is not rounded. All right. There's different ways that you can set this up. All right. What do I mean? Well, if you use border radius, as they show right here, again, remember, top, bottom, right, left, top, bottom, basically right, left. I don't know how exactly it's set up in here, but you can play with this stuff. All right. If you come in and you've got, let's say that in here, what this is right there. Let's say I had come into here and where I've got border radius. Let's say I didn't have any of these numbers in there. I didn't have the 10 picks, etc. If I come in there and I say border radius and I put in there 50%, now this container that you see right here would be perfectly round. So if you want to round something, one way that you can round it is to take the container and set the border radius to 50%. If I set it to 25, it'll look more like it does now, more elliptical like. So there's a lot of different ways that you can set this. And as the author says here, when you code the border radius property, you can assign one to all 4 or a different one for each. You do that again for effect. One thing you always want to try to make sure, though, as a web developer, because I've seen this happen before. Somebody plays with this and gets a really cool effect. All right. And somebody says, wow, that's really cool what you did. Oh, yeah. What was the website about? Gee, I don't remember. So you don't want to spend so much time on special effects that you lose what the website is about. All right. And again, you might think, well, that never happens. It does. And on the other end of that, I should mention this to you. I haven't, I don't think yet, but there's a guy who literally, I think this site's still up. It's called websitesthatsuck.com. No joke. All right. Coming soon. You can see it hasn't been updated for a while. But this guy used to put out a book every year. And he'd go through different sites that were online. He'd pick out ones that he thought really stunk. All right. And you could take a look. All right. All right. Setting background color and images. Well, background color, you kind of know about already. That's what we've been doing. But you don't have to set something to a background color. You can set an image. All right. When you set a background image, it's greedy. It'll take up as much room as you let it. All right. For instance, I used to show this to people and some of them it just drove nuts. They hated it. But if you remember that little round smiley yellow face, it's a little yellow circle that's got 2 dots for eyes and a smile on it. And what I would do is I'd set the background image, but the image itself was very small. So instead of getting one of those, you'd get about 500 of them on the page, and it looked terrible. And because that is because by default, the background repeats. If you don't want it to repeat, you can say no repeat. Or you can have it just repeat horizontally with a repeat X, have it repeat just vertically with a repeat Y. And you're going to see an example of this when we use it at the end of the chapter. All right. Gradients are kind of cool. Gradients, in a way, they're kind of like morphing, when something morphs from something into something else. But with gradients, you're typically morphing colors. So here we're morphing from red to blue, here from white to red, etc. We're going to go through a morphing example in just a bit. All right. And again, that they can be used and they can be a really nice thing, but they should not be overly used. All right. So as it says, the CSS lets you create gradients for backgrounds without using images. So the idea here is this is all being done with colors. I'm not going to read this to you because that's all I do. You learn how to use it by playing with it. That's the best thing I can tell you. All right. So I think we're almost done with the chapter, believe it or not. And as it says here, a web page that uses borders and backgrounds. So if we look, this is what we have. And now it's pretty obvious, some of the stuff that's changed, such as, well, if you notice, we now have a container here. And outside of the container, we're using a gradient, it looks like. All right. We've got a line here. Other than that, it doesn't look that different. But what you're going to see, not so much in here, but when we look at the CSS, what do you see? Well, you can see there's the gradient. And look at this. This is a little confusing to people. There's HTML and there's body. All right. HTML is the entire page. It's everything. Body here is what we made 700 pixels. So what that means is, going back to our picture that we just looked at, HTML is everything. It's the whole thing, including the gradient. Body is just what's in the 700 pixels. We're going to use that when we go over the CSS for chapter 5 in a few minutes. And you can see the stuff that's in here. Again, a great way to learn. Take this, rip it apart. All right. Take the stuff that's in here and comment some of it out and see exactly what happens. When you do your next test, you are going to be creating a website that's going to have to implement a lot of this stuff. And that's it. So let's jump right into and take a look at what's at the end of the chapter here. First of all, I'm going to bring up, not this. And if I have this open, I'm going to close it. I'm going to close that. And I'm going to bring up chapter 5. And remember, right now, our chapter 5 looks exactly like our chapter 4 did, because we just copied it over. But I'm going to bring up chapter 5. So let's open that with code. And if I do that and bring it up, and if I bring up the index.html file, that's what it currently looks like. All right, exactly what we finished up with before. So let's see what we want to change now. All right, so again, that was chapter 4. We're now in chapter 5. And let's see. Okay, all of our requirements are right here. That's good. So we've only got about a half dozen things we want to do here. So, well, when you look here, notice there's the HTML, and that's got white. That's not a gradient, but it looks like it's something. In fact, what they are is it's images of bats. All right. Then inside of there, inside of our body, we've got something that is a certain width. It's got a gradient on it, you can see here. This is the same stuff we had before. All right. But it looks like now we don't really want that orange around here like we had before because we're using a gradient. All right. We still got the welcome. So it looks like we're not changing much. So let's look here and then we'll go through each of these steps. All right. So to start with, the first thing we want to do, as it says, is we want to format the body of the page so that it is 800 pixels wide, not the HTML, but the body on the page. We want that to be 800 pixels wide. We want it to have a black border. That's the border that you see here. And I should have mentioned this before. I didn't, just so you know. When you set up a border, there's nothing that says that every part of the border has to be the same size. That's border top, that's border left, that's border bottom, and that's border right. Add a background image behind the body that uses the bats.gif file. So that's this. All right, that's in the images folder. Add a black border below the header and above the footer. All right, so that's below, that's the one here. And the one above the footer, that's here. Okay. Remove the shadow, the italics, and color from the first heading. I already mentioned that. So this is going to be black again. Remember that currently it's not. All right. Add a 45-degree gradient to the header and to the footer. The gradient in the header should go from white at the left to orange. What is that? 3/4 of the way to black at the right. The gradient in the footer should be the reverse of this. Be sure to provide for all modern browsers. We'll mention that when we get to that point. Finally, adjust the margins and adjust the padding for the elements on the page so that it looks, we want it to look like this. All right, so let's get to it. All right, there's very little to nothing I'm going to have to change here in the HTML. I'm just going to jump right into my styles and my main.css. All right, and even above my body here, I'm going to do two things to start with, and you'll see what they are and why they are right away. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say here HTML, and I'm going to say background image. And the way you do that is you say URL, then inside of there, all right, we want to say /images/bats.gif. All right. And I'm going to explain something to you that might make little sense now, but it will in a few minutes. When we do this, we don't want this to stick out, this bats. In other words, our web page should be in the foreground and these bats should be in the background. Hopefully what I just said made some sense to you. And the way you can do that is you can set a special property called a z-index. And I'm going to set the z-index here to 0. That's all I'm doing. We're not done yet by a long shot. But I'm going to save this. And now I'm going to jump back to my index file. And let's bring it up. Now that looks terrible. All right. And it looks terrible, but I wanted you to see this because right now I haven't made a distinction between the HTML and the body. All right. That's what we're going to do right now. And you'll see a big difference after we do that. Right now, Since we haven't done that, there is no distinction. The HTML is being greedy and it's taking up the entire page. So let's fix that. All right, so there's our HTML. Now we're going to do the body. All right, I'm going to set the z-index to 1. The higher the z-index, the more it comes towards the foreground. The lower the z-index, the more it goes to the background. We're only going to have a z-index of 1 and 0 in here. So 1 means our body will be in the foreground and that HTML part will be in the background. All right, well, we already have a body and I forgot about that. So let's bring that back. We've already got that, remember, with our font family in it. All right, we're told to make a width here of 800 pixels. That was in our requirements. All right. Okay, I'm also going to go and make the background color here. We'll make it white. So I'll use my pound FF. All right, and I should mention to you, when you've got something that repeats like this, FF, you can only use 3 of them if you want. It's a shortcut. Use 6, it doesn't hurt a thing. All right. Now, what's changed? I like to put in a little and then look at it. It's not going to look that different now. All right. It's been moved over a little. Okay. And I got it. It's split up. It's looking a little bit more like it should look, but it's still got a ways to go. I think you'd agree with that. So let's keep going. Well, I want it to be centered on the page. So I'm going to say margin. This is a CSS trick, 0 auto. Let's save it. And let's look at it again. See the difference? It is now centered on the page. Now, we haven't drawn our box around this yet, and that's okay. We will in just a minute. But what I'm trying to show you is before we put in that margin 0 auto, it was pushed way over to here because there was no margin set. To say margin 0 auto means no margin on the top and the bottom and center it on the left and the right. And that's exactly what just happened here. All right. We don't want any padding in here. We do want a border. All right. And we do want a shadow around here. All right, let's save it, run it again and look at it. Now it's looking better. Again, it isn't perfect. We're not done yet, but it's sure as heck is getting better. All right. We can now see we've got our border around here. Okay, we can see what's in the background, etc. Okay, so it's getting there. It's got a ways to go, but it's getting there. All right. Now, what we are told is for our H1s, our H2s, and our paragraph, we want there to be no margin. We want there to be no padding. And again, you've already seen me do this. I like to do, put in a line or two and then immediately go and look at it. Okay. Again, now notice by removing that padding, it's really, I think, starting to take form. All right. And looking more the way we want it to look. All right. Let's see where we are now then. That image, I think we still want to float that. I don't think we have to touch any of this. The coloring, that should all be okay. Our links, those should be okay, to my knowledge at least. All right. Now we have to start worrying about working with that gradient. All right. And I'm not going to lie to you. This is probably at least, the hardest part of this example is doing this. All right. And we need to do it twice because we need a gradient both in the header and in the footer. So here's our footer. Do we have anything that just says header? No, not that I can, well, header image. So I'm going to put it right here. And I'm going to build this right now. All right. Now, that depending on what you're trying to put on a web page can be a very important website. All right. Got a weird name, kind of, but it makes sense when you think about it. All right. The name of this website is caniuse.com. Caniuse.com. You can put in here any CSS or HTML property and see how well it's supported. Like what? Like I can put gradient in here and you'll notice what's supported and what's not supported. Green is good, red is not. So what does that mean? It means if you're using an old version of Chrome, your gradients aren't going to work. If you're using an old version of Opera or Firefox, etc., it's not going to work. If you're using IE, even IE 11, it's not going to support a gradient. So you're going to have to change and use Edge or something else. All right, you'll notice that even with Edge, versions 12 through 18 did not support gradients. So it's caniuse.com. All right. Now, when you are working with this stuff, I'm going to type in like about 5 or 6 lines of code, just so you know, 5 or 6 lines of code. And if you give me a second after I type it in, I'll explain to you what each one of those lines of code mean. But let's type them in first. And I'm just going to copy this 4 times. All right. And I'm going to get rid of this. And I'm going to tell it to word wrap, because this is going to be kind of big. All right, I'm going to go over all of these, but first, Let's save. Let's run it and look at it. So you can see I now have this. There's my gradient. I haven't changed the color yet. I want to get rid of it in there, but we'll fix that in a minute. All right, and it looks like now this probably should be moved over to here, but we'll fix that too. All right. The point is, though, what I want you to understand is this. What we're doing is we're telling it that this is a 45-degree gradient. When it starts, it should be 0, or at 0, it should be white. All right. Once you get to 75%, it should be changing to orange. And once it gets to 100%, it should be black. That's what those numbers mean. Now, and you might say, fine, but I don't get the rest of it. Well, the minus WebKit, etc., minus Moz, minus O, those are called browser prefixes. All right. Now, the WebKit, I believe the WebKit is for Safari and Chrome. The Moz, I believe, is for Firefox. The O is for Opera. So what it's saying is, when they first started working with gradients, the way that these were supported by different browsers, it had a different amount of support. So what it's saying is, if you're looking at this on a Chrome browser or a Safari, use this. If you're looking at it on a Firefox browser, use this. If you're looking at it on an Opera browser, use this. And the idea is, sooner or later, these things will have total 100% support from all browsers, and it will be the same. When that day comes, you'll be able to get rid of all these and just use this one. All right. Now, I don't know how good of an explanation that was or was not. But again, browser prefixes minus WebKit for Chrome and for Safari, minus linear, minus gradient, because this is a linear gradient that we're adding. Moz, again, is for Firefox. O is for Opera. I think Microsoft, if you're using it, is MS, I believe. All right. Plus, at the bottom, we are adding some padding, and we are adding a bottom border. So that bottom border is this right there that you see. All right. Now, I'm going to reverse this. All right. We're not done yet, but I'm going to go down to the bottom and I'm going to reverse this. All right. What do I mean? Well, I want to show you. I probably wouldn't normally do it this way, but it's how I am going to do it. And that is, I'm going to grab this. I'm going to grab everything we just put in here, not the padding, but all of these linear gradients. I'm going to copy it. All right. I'm going to go down to the bottom where my footer is. And underneath what I had in there, I'm going to paste it in. Now, I have to reverse this because instead of it being white 0, I want that to be black 0 on each one of these. Because we were told that the gradient should be reversed. And then at the end, instead of being black 100%, it should be, whoops, not there, should be white 100%. All right, let me save that. And let's look at that one. So notice the difference. Now, it's very small because right now our footer isn't very big. All right. We're also told that we want to put put a border on the top of a footer. So I'm going to put that in a second. All right. But I want to show you something, and then we're going to go do the stuff in the middle. And that is this. Okay. This font size and this text align, that doesn't really apply to the footer. What that applies to really is the footer paragraph. So I'm going to move that out and put that in there by itself. I think that makes more sense. Okay. Also, for the footer itself, we're told to put a border top on there, and it'll be 2 pixels solid black. And we want this to be a little bigger, so let's put some padding in here. I'm going to put padding in here of 1 rem. All right, let's see how that changed things. All right, now it's a lot bigger. And again, where this went from white to black, this is going from to white. All right, it isn't perfect. We still have some stuff to do in the middle, but for lack of better words, at least, it's getting there. All right. Okay. So let's go and take a look at what's left to do in here. And just so you know, literally, you can put CSS in any order you want, but this is the whole document, right? This is what's showing on my web page. So I try to break it down, and you'll notice the headers on the top, the footers on the bottom. It's not that you have to do that, but boy, if you end up creating something and someone later ends up taking whatever you created and they have to maintain it, they're going to be happy if when you set everything up for them, all right, if you set everything up for them, if you you have some rhyme and reason to the way it's set up. All right, I'm going to come up to this image that we floated, and I'm going to put some padding in here. 1 rem of padding. Now, I'm not going to save it yet, but you can see what it looks like right now. All right, now let me go back in and save it. And it's pushed over a little bit. Maybe hard to tell, but it has been. All right. So let's see, what else do we want to do in here? All right. Well, we'd actually like some padding. Right now, this looks kind of all scrunched up, for lack of better words. All right. So I'm going to put some padding in here. And when I look at this, it's all inside of a main. Everything that I want to change is what's in main. So I'm going to come in here. All right. And those are my headings in my header area, etc. So I'm going to come down here, and in main, I'm going to add some padding. All right. And we can, let's use all 4. So I'll put in here 20 pixels, 25 pixels, 25 pixels, and 25 pixels. A lot of times you don't know until you do it and then take a look at it. So again, right now, there's no padding. All right, and let's go in and let's save this. And look at it. Now it's not so pushed across. All right, there is some padding in there, in my humble opinion at least. Looks a little bit nicer. All right, a few more things we want to change in here. Okay, such as, well, let's see. Inside of our header here, all right, inside of our header here, right now that's orange, and we're told we don't want that to be orange. So let's look here. color orange. Now I could just, it's going to default to black anyway, but I'm going to just, again, you don't have to do that. I could have just removed the line as well. And now you'll notice that it's black. All right, I also want to move this over so that here where we have the text indent, let's knock it down to about 50 and see. I don't know what it needs to be, but I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. Now it looks better. It could be a little more, maybe 60. Also, this almost now looks like it might be a little bit too big for what's in here. All right. And like 40. And let's take this one instead of 300. Let's make it about 225. Again, I'm just doing this off the top of my head. I don't have anything written down here. Yeah, that's not too bad. Again, I could play with this if we want to or need to. It's not terrible the way it is. Maybe it's not great either. I don't know. All right. Let's see. This is our main section here. All right, right here. And you notice right here, boy, there's a lot of space there, and there's not much space in here. You know what I mean? So we could play with that if we wanted to. Okay. In other words, this paragraph that says, I started this website, let's look at that. There it is. So that paragraph right there is this one. And we got this if you click on a personal link. So those two paragraphs, it's not so much that we have to, but I'm going to put an ID. I don't even think we were told to do this. I'm going to put an ID on here, and it's going to be equal to, I'm going to call it LH for line height. That's a crummy name, but I'm going to use it anyway. All right. And what did I do here? Oh, it should be class because I'm using it twice, not an ID. All right, then I'm going to come into here and put it up here. I don't know why, but I am. So dot LH for line height. And I'm just going to say here, line height. Let's try 1.3 and see what it looks like. Not too much better. It's a little bit more spaced out. You make it more than that. All right. I like that a little bit better. It's not that again, that it's that big a thing, but I want to take a look now and see what we were supposed to do. What's missing? Well, this now looks way too big to me, the one we have. Okay. Other than that, I don't think there's really anything. So I'm going to play with that because I think it's kind of too big. I think once I knock that down, it should be looking decent. Maybe not great, but decent. All right. So let's come back in here. I'm going to change this to 1.75 for my line height. And again, it's all a matter of what you think it should be. All right. And in our main CSS here, that was the H1. So we've got font size 250. Okay, what if we knock that down to about 175 and knock not 1750? It'll look really ridiculous. And let's make this 200. All right, that's to me looking a lot more the way that it's supposed to look. So let's take this and I'm going to do this. I'm going to move this over like this. Oops, that's not what I wanted, but that is okay. All right, I'd like to try to put both of these up here and take a look at them. All right. Looks like this could be moved over a little bit more. That actually looks pretty good now. Still could maybe have a little more room in there. Could have some room down here. All right. So in other words, where it says product categories right there, okay, we could add a little bit of margin top right there. All right. So let's do that. They'll come when I'm not this uncoordinated. So. All right. So by product categories. That's an H2. Okay. And we can give this its own ID. And I'm just going to call it, again, not great name, but I'm going to call it add margin. Not a great name at all. Okay, it's an ID. So I'm going to say here, I think it was bottom, but we'll find out. Margin, bottom, 1 rem. Okay, well, that's good. I need some margin top too. Took or not, but now, is it perfect? The answer is no. Could I still make changes? Yes, but really what I'm doing after this, for lack of better words, is what I like to refer to as I'm wordsmithing. In other words, I'm tweaking this to make it do some stuff, that it maybe isn't doing right now. All right. So I could play with this, but if this was yours and you turned it in like this, it would be fine because you have shown that you can do this stuff in here that you were asked to do. So let's take a couple minutes and go back and review what we put in here for our CSS. All right. At the top to the HTML there, okay, we added that background image. And again, that is the syntax. You use background image with URL. We are in the CSS folder, so we had to go up one level and then go to our images folder to find bats.gif. So that became our image. We wanted it to be in the background, so we gave it a z index of 0. Then with our body, we wanted that to be in the foreground, so we gave that a z index of 1. We set up our font family. That was what we had before. We gave this body a width of 800 pixels, gave it a background color, so if there's anything sticking out, so to speak, it would be white. We centered it on the page. We took away any padding that was in it. We gave it a border all the way around it of 3 pixels solid black, and we box shadowed. All right. Then we came back to the H1, the H2, and the H3 headings, plus our paragraph, and we removed all margin and all padding from there. All right. Next, we added the linear gradient to our heading, and we used the browser prefixes. So the background image was a minus followed by whatever the browser prefix was, minus linear minus gradient. The minus WebKit again was for Safari and Chrome. The minus Moz was for Firefox. The minus O was for Opera. We said we wanted a 45-degree linear gradient that would start white at the beginning. At 75%, it would transition over to orange. And at 100% of the way, it would transition over to 100% black. All right. In addition, we added a little bit of padding on the bottom and a bottom border as per the requirements. This line height, I don't really like the way it's working. Doesn't look great. All right. There's a lot of changes that could be made. All right. For instance, when you take a look in here, that I think is a paragraph. That's a paragraph. That's a paragraph. So what if we went in here and instead of using that LH that I used, what if I just said, and I don't know if this will look better or worse. If it looks worse, I'll get rid of it. But I'm going to say take all paragraphs and give them a line height of 1.75. All right. Maybe that's too much, but you get the idea and you can really see now how it has changed. All right. Maybe that's, like I said, maybe that's even too much. We want to cut it down to 1.5, let's say. And maybe that's a little nicer. All right. Then we took our image. It was already floated left, but we just added some right padding to it. All right. Our H1, we modified the size a little bit. I think we knocked it down a little to 175%, where it was almost double that. And the first letter is a little bit bigger. Then for our H2 heading, we again modified the size we already had. I don't think we changed anything in there this time for either this or for this. I'm going to try making that 30 and see if that helps. Now they're pretty much even by making that text indent 30. Okay. We put padding all the way around it. You saw before we did that, hopefully at least, you saw how it was really, really kind of cramped all the way around it. By putting some padding in there, we now had some room all the way around it. All right. This add margin, that added top and bottom margin, you should always just get used to having a practice that really should have looked like this. Now, if I do that, I've got to change it back in my code where I put that in there. So wherever I added that add margin over here, which I think I did, there it is. So that should look like this. All right. We did not change anything with our links or our line height here. And in our footer, I pulled the paragraph stuff out and put it into a footer P. And for the footer itself, it is virtually the same linear gradient that we had before, except we're reversing. Excuse me. We're reversing. So instead of it starting with white and going with black, going to black, it is now starting at black and going to white. All right. And that is, to my knowledge, at least, that is everything. So again, it isn't perfect. I mean, I could go and grab the authors and make it look exactly like the authors. I don't want to do that. I think that's a because I'm just showing you things and trying to do a bunch of stuff as we're going along. All right. So just so you are aware of this, what that means is tomorrow we will learn how to use CSS layout. All right. So 2-column, 3-column, etc. types of layouts. All right. And positioning. This is really important stuff. All right. We will talk about different ways that you can position elements. I know at least one of you came back and emailed me and said, hey, I'm having a problem with that footer because it's supposed to be at the bottom. Well, we'll talk about how to make a sticky footer where it is always on the bottom. We'll talk about that amongst other things. All right. Then when we get done with that, we will again go over the assignment for chapter 6, which will be putting this into a 2-column layout. So we're pulling these links that we had and we're making them in their own column. And we're adding another image here. Looks like most of the rest of it hasn't changed. All right, so we'll do that for a 2-column layout. Then after we get done with that, we will go into chapter 7. Much of the stuff that's in here, you've already learned, or at least learned some of it. How to code an unordered list, how to code an ordered list. We've talked about those already. A nested list is just a list within a list, and we'll look at description lists, which virtually no one uses. We'll talk about how to change the bullets and the numbering, a little bit more about links, and then how to create our own menus. When we get done with that, we will go into the chapter 7 here. So you'll notice we will now have a 2-tiered menu. So it'll say here, home, product list, personal, decorating ideas. And when you put your mouse over decorating ideas, you'll have these 4 things that pop down in a submenu. All right. So again, one more time, just want to say this because I am finished, but I want to say 2 more things again. If you have not yet turned in your test, get me something by tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. All right. At 8, right before class, those of you who have not turned it in yet, I'm going to look. If for some reason you're still having problems with GitHub, then take your folder, zip it, zip the folder and email me the folder so I have something. All right. And make sure that you send me an invite as well. All right. We went over how to do that earlier. So tomorrow when we start, I'm going to jump right into chapter 6, do the same thing we did today, then 7, same thing we did today. Then at the end of the period, I am going to show you, all right, you are going to get sent this as well. I made a 45-minute video last week. All right, so I'm not quite as nasally as I am right now, but it explained how to do everything that was on that test. All right. Then Thursday, when you come in here, by the time you get into class, I will have created a pretest. All right. And I will email that to you at 7 o'clock on Thursday. Go over it between 8 and 8:20 on Thursday. Then at 8:20 or at 10:20, I should say, you get 8:20 to 10:20, 2 hours to work on it. And then at 10:20, I'll do the pretest for you. All right. And then next Monday, a week from yesterday, will be your test on chapters 3 through 7. It may seem to you right now like, oh my gosh, we're going through this stuff so fast. You know what? We are. All right. And part of the reason for that is the faster we get into JavaScript, the better off this class runs. My plan next week is to go through chapters 8, 9, and 10. All right. And if we get there, we're in really good shape after 3 weeks. All right. So send me a test if you haven't. And finally, if you don't want to be involved in any kind of study group, send me an email today. If I don't get an email from you saying you don't want to be involved, I will take the student who has volunteered to chair up a study group and I will send her all of your emails. All right. So with that, have a good rest of the day. I will talk to you tomorrow. See you then.